as much as I love doing urban scenes and super detailed cityscapes and handmade roads and all that kind of stuff, I've been feeling kind of burned out from that, working on the Rochester division as well as working on this paper mill on the P&B. So I needed to take a break, and that led me back to the P&B onto an area that you're probably not familiar with and probably not sure where we are on the P&B at all. This is actually part of the Moss Creek branch, which is part of the Pleasantville secondary, which comes off of the P&B main line halfway between Grafton Yard and Allegheny Yard, just to give you a little bit of context as to where that is. And you could also rewind back to the very beginning and look at the full-size map and see exactly where we are. Now, the Moss Creek branch is a fun little branch line, and it's very scenic, it's very woodsy. It's about 3 miles long, and it comes off of the Pleasantville secondary, as I had said. And this is meant to be a very scenic line, and this is at the end of the Moss Creek branch. We have a little logging industry here. I can't remember what the name of it is off the top of my head. I'll have to reference my paperwork, but this is where we're going to get all of our pulpwood for the paper mill and all of the wood for our lumber mills, which are on Paint Creek branch, and I think there's another another wood facility. I'm trying to think of where it is. I can't think of it off the top of my head. But this is one of those builds that I thought would probably be a lot easier than I had expected. Because I was thinking, hey, it's a very simple scenery, or very simple scenic build. There's not a whole lot of details that are going to be needed. It's just sort of a woodsy thing. It's a 3-mile branch line. I'll be able to hammer this out in a couple hours, maybe one Saturday night or something like that. And boy, was I wrong. It took me a lot longer to do this. I guess as expected. I should just be used to this by this point, that everything takes me a lot longer to do than I anticipate. And I think part of it was just due to the fact that I'm kind of rusty at these scenic builds right now. I've been so immersed in the Rochester build, doing suburban neighborhoods and urban areas, and then also working in downtown Allegheny on the P&B to bring it up to speed, and doing handmade roads there, and just doing a lot of these urban scenes and really industrial scenes, that coming back to doing something that's a little more simple was actually really challenging for me. And it was refreshing, but the beginning of this build, probably the first half of this video, is a little sketchy just in terms of how I place things, and just trying to get my footing back, I guess, so to speak, into this area. And I did have to do a lot of off-camera rebuilding. This is an area that I had previously attempted to model years ago. And what I mean by years ago, I'm saying 10 years ago. I probably haven't touched this branch in about 10 years. So my terraforming skills were very bad. And I believe that the terraforming was even done back in probably Trainz 2009, maybe 2010. So it was a little bit different of technique, and probably using 10-meter grid instead of 5-meter grid for most of it. So the landscape wasn't super great. So I went and just redid all of the terrain around here. I redid all the mountains. I flattened everything out, bulldozed it all down to 0 on the baseboard, and then raised it back up. And I kind of was getting a lot of a D-Bev vibe, my Dry Brook route. It's got a very similar flavor to it, where it's kind of climbing these steep grades through the woods, and there's a creek bed that parallels the tracks, which we'll get into in the next episode. I didn't get to it in this episode, but you'll see little flashes of it here and there. But I was kind of getting some D-Bevy vibes, and then once I started to feel that out, I started to feel a little bit more comfortable. I'm like, wait, I've already done a build like this. Let me just try to remember what I did when I was doing some of these crazy deep scenic areas. And of course, one of the main things that I got to do back here, since we're in a logging camp, is plant a whole lot of trees. So what you just saw me do here was just mock up a small collection of trees that I thought looked good. A couple pine trees, a couple deciduous trees, and a couple different colors and scales. And I just made a small group, and then I copied and pasted it into a bigger group, and then I'm just sort of expanding that and just making it bigger and bigger and bigger. And then what I'll do is I'll make it an even bigger group and copy and paste that. And each time I copy and paste, I'm rotating that group of trees, so I'm getting a little bit of diversity. And then, as you saw there at the end of that clip, I'll go in and manually move around some of the trees so that the spacing is a little bit different. and it doesn't look like I've copied and pasted it. And yeah, I'm using 3D trees for all of these background trees, and we'll see what kind of a hit I'm gonna take on my performance and frame rate through here. So far, it's been fine, but I'm really trying to get away from using 2D trees as much as possible. There's still a lot of 2D trees out there that I do like, and shrubs, and I will be using them here and there in places, but for the most part, I'm trying to use more of these 3D trees, because that's the direction this game is going, is 3D trees. Let's face it, billboard trees are old tech, and we need to sort of future-proof ourselves a little bit. So more work now might be less work in the future when I go to port this thing into Trainz 2019. I don't know, who knows? That's just my hope. But yeah, so along with this build, I drew a lot of inspiration from Scratchy's Eagle River. I'm not trying to copy it by any means, but I definitely did go in there and use the pick list and pick some of the assets that he had used. But, major shout out to Scratchy. That's an absolutely beautiful route. It's amazing. So if you don't have it, you should go over to Join a Rail and pick it up, because the Eagle River route is just gorgeous. But because I don't really have a tremendous familiarity with logging camps, and in particular like the assets that are needed for that in this game, I found it really useful to just go over to that route and just kind of see what he had done, and the assets that he used and how he spread things out. And one of the things that I really appreciated about what Scratchy did on the Eagle River is that he utilized a lot of negative space. He didn't really populate it too heavily with grasses and shrubs, which is what I'm doing here, which is the opposite of what I'm talking about. But he really utilized negative space and open areas in the main layout design elements. What I mean by that is like where the camps are and yards and stuff like that. The main line is very tight and clustered. The trees are really close to the tracks and stuff like that, which I like as well. But I was really most noting the use of negative space, and I'm trying to utilize that a bit in here. And again, like really just tripping over my own feet, trying to get the assets down that I wanted. And I don't really know why I was struggling with it so much, but I put down some grass, and I'm like, I don't like this. And then I'd find some other grass, and I'm like, I don't like this, or this doesn't look right. So it took a little bit before I really got into the groove. And I'm trying to keep these episodes a little bit shorter, between 10 and 15 minutes. So I did end up just cutting it short. By the time I got into the groove, I was like, oh, all right, I gotta end this episode because it's getting to that point. But yeah, back to Eagle River. Really great map. Definitely took a lot of inspiration from there, and a lot of the assets I used from there. And if there's other assets that I can make use of that are on the download station and not necessarily from another Jointed Rail payware route, I'll definitely swap some out. And by no means is this a completed scene. It's very incomplete by the end of it. There's still a lot of detail items that I want to implement in here, like tools and scrap items and things like that around the sheds and that sort of thing. Vehicles, people, and that, all the things that I saved to the last little bit. But we'll get there eventually. I'm pretty happy, though, overall with how this area does shape up by the end of it. Even though I struggled with it for a long time, it did begin to finally take shape once I figured out exactly what the heck I was doing. And I'm really looking forward to doing the rest of this branch and the rest of this section, because it's so different from the rest of the P&B that has been built so far. It's very rustic, it's very woodsy, and it's pretty different from most of the build styles that I've done previously. So I'm definitely looking forward to getting more of this area done, and that's going to open up another layer of operations. So maybe the next time that I do a live stream, whenever that'll be, I could do some kind of an operating session, and we can actually bring some of these pulpwood loads down to the lumber mill. Actually, the loads here would go down to Allegheny and then get switched into a local, which would then go serve the lumber mill or the paper mill. So it's going to increase the operation potential of the P&B by a tremendous amount, and I think that's going to be pretty cool. I've already run a couple of test trains just to make sure that things flow properly. You might have noticed that between now and the beginning, at some point, I added a third track, which the log cars are on. I did start with just two, and then after I tested it a little bit, I was like, you know what? I need one more track to park some trains, because the thing is with me when I do switching, I prefer to just bring like empties into an area and then leave them, and then take like a cut of loads back down, and then come back later for the new loads and drop off the empties and so on and so forth. I don't really particularly care to stay at an industry and then run a train at 2 miles an hour while the logs are loaded or the coal is loaded. That's incredibly boring to me. So I'd rather just, have a spot to park some empties, run around the train, leave them there, and then come back later for the loads. So that was sort of my design choice there. And things might change, as always. Anytime that I do one of these builds, I'll pause to do the video part of that and this voiceover and stuff. And while I'm watching my playback, I'm like, oh, you know what? Maybe I could fix this, or I'll change this. Or you guys, once I get a video up, you leave me comments and you tell me how I can do things better and what I did wrong, and I go back and make those adjustments and, try to take the feedback with a grain of salt and make it a little bit more prototypical if I can. So any ideas that you guys have, I'm always open to suggestions, always. So leave them in the comments down below. Another thing I'd like to mention is, I don't know if you caught it, there was a point where I added a couple new assets in here. One is the substation that's just out of the frame at the top, and another, which you're going to see in a moment, it's a little RV trailer. I've mentioned it on my Twitter and on my Facebook and all over my social media. I am starting to bring my own assets into the game, and you will see those assets being used in my maps as I introduce them into the game. So I'm not going to talk too much about it because I don't want to make this into like some kind of a commercial, but those assets will be available through Patreon. So you can just go over to my Patreon page, patreon.com/approachmedium, and each month I'll release a new pack of assets that you guys will be able to use. And hopefully I'll be able to also utilize those assets within a build within the same time frame, but I can't guarantee that. But I will always share screenshots and that sort of thing of what's coming out. But at this point, this is the last clip of this episode before we get into the cinematics. And I'm just adding some final grass details here, some, I don't even know what kind of herb plants these are. I can't remember what they're called, but they always add a nice touch, in my opinion, a nice texture to the other spline grasses and give it some nice shape and stuff like that. But there's still so much other stuff that I gotta do here. That shed needs some details. There's another shed that needs some details, and then there's the big garage looking building, the warehouse looking building that I need to put like a driveway to or something, or a fence. I don't know. I need to figure out how to shape it up. But this is the last section of this build that I kind of like. I like the idea. I'm trying to put down a little house here, like a little cottage in the woods. I don't know who would live here. Maybe this house was here before the logging road was put into place, or maybe they worked for the logging company. I'm not really sure. I haven't really thought about it, but I thought it was a nice touch just to add a little something back here, so it's not just an industry in the middle of the woods. And I'll probably salt and pepper some of these sort of things here and there. And there's the RV asset. That's a new one that will be out through my Patreon pretty soon, so keep an eye out for that. But I think that is probably going to do it for my voiceover for this episode. So I'm going to let this clip run out, and I'm going to leave you guys with a few cinematics for the rest of this episode. And I hope you guys enjoyed it. Leave me a comment below if you did, if you got any ideas. And I'll see you guys in the next one.